The hall of black cedar and winter glass had never sounded like this, full of voices that stayed low because fear did not need volume. Magnus stood on the central mosaic where her rank-binding right had broken her 8 years earlier, and she kept her shoulders level because she refused to give Lord Cassian the tremor he wanted to see. Cassian held out his hand toward the tribunal dais as if he were offering fairness itself. By charter, I invoke challenge. The king has compromised judgment through private influence by a packless archive keeper. Any decree she touched is suspect. The words hit the room and moved through it like a draft under closed doors. People shifted. No one spoke her name. They never did when they wanted to erase her. Magnus heard the old memory before she felt it. The drumbeat from 1320. The day an elder had called her a liability in front of every ranking family in North Court. Cassian had been the judge who rose that day, robes still and voice precise, and declared she had no binding rank because rank required pact stability, which she did not possess. The entire hall had watched her stand there without a place to stand. Now the same man smiled at her like history had already repeated itself. King Alistair Nightshade sat above them on the obsidian throne, one hand closed over the carved wolf head armrest. He had ruled 9 years alone since 1319, and people said he could end wars by saying one sentence and holding silence after it. Today, he did not speak. His gaze stayed on Cassian first, then on her, unreadable as winter lake ice. Magnus forced herself to breathe low and steady. If he defended her now, Cassian would claim exactly what he already claimed, that she had wrapped herself around the throne and bent it. If he disowned her, the Alliance armies waiting at the northern pass would remain loyal to him. If he chose the Alliance, she would survive in body and vanish in law. Cassian stepped forward one pace. Your Majesty, for the stability of the court, distance yourself from this manipulation and preserve the border pact. Magnus did not look up at the throne. She looked at the mosaic under her boots where silver lines met black stone and remembered how she had sworn after 1320 that no room would ever get her on her knees again. Alistair rose. The room stilled so sharply that even parchment scratching stopped. He walked down from the dais and stopped beside her, not above her. When he spoke, his voice stayed quiet and carried anyway. This hall has misnamed her once. It will not do it again. Every head turned. He faced the tribunal judges. I void the military alliance conditioned on her disgrace. I remove Lord Cassian Voss from office for charter fraud and treason, and I order exile under guard before nightfall. The words struck harder than shouting could have done. Nobles gasped openly now. Someone near the back whispered, "He cannot." And Etta Thorne answered from somewhere behind Magnus, "Under North Court Charter, he can." Alistair turned toward Magnus, and for one suspended second she saw no throne in him, only a man who had spent 9 years refusing every vulnerable choice he could refuse. "Magnus Valewood," he said, "I name you royal counselor before full court. I claim you as my mate before the same witnesses who denied your rank." The hall shook loose into noise. This was the moment where every story about kings went false, where terms appeared and debts got collected and women discovered the price hidden under recognition. Magnus waited for the hidden price. None came. What came was memory, years peeling backward to where this began, with a forged grain order in freezing wind and a king who asked for counsel instead of obedience. By 1328, Magnus had mastered invisibility as a craft. She had learned it first in 1320, when Cassian branded her a liability at the rank-binding rite. And the lesson stayed because it worked. Invisible people got assigned to ledger rooms no one visited, and ledger rooms did not laugh when you entered. Invisible people were called useful without anyone having to admit respect. In 1323, Etta Thorne had taken her into the palace records office with one practical sentence. "You read closely and you keep quiet so you can survive here." Edda was chief steward by title and intelligence officer by habit, and Magnus understood early that Edda's kindness came wearing armor. The records office sat below the western wing where heat never reached the far shelves in winter. Rats avoided the sulfur boxes used to preserve wax samples, and everyone else avoided the treaty stacks because old agreements smelled like mold and political embarrassment. Magnus handled those stacks alone and felt grateful for work people considered beneath them. That morning in Winter Court, the snow had turned hard and bright enough to hurt her eyes when she crossed into the levee chamber with a crate of grain permits for signature. She expected routine. She expected two stewards arguing over storage tariffs and a magistrate pretending not to nap. She found Lord Cassian holding a decree with the royal signet already pressed, ordering emergency grain seizure from 3 river villages on the eastern border. Magnus read fast because speed had protected her before. The language referenced flood loss in villages that had not flooded. The storage totals were wrong for winter levels by almost half. The villages named in the order were the same ones currently negotiating supply rights with a rival pack. Her first instinct was the old one. Stay silent, place the crate, leave. Cassian saw her eyes linger and smiled without warmth. Archive keeper, bring this to the transport clerk. Immediate execution. She could carry the decree out and tell herself she had no standing. She could obey and let 600 families lose winter grain to a false emergency. The obstacle was simple and brutal. She had no rank, and refusing a high officer could end her position by dusk. She set the crate down. My lord, the flood clause cites spring losses from the North Fork. These are East Bank villages. The figures do not match tax rolls. The room turned toward her as if a wall had spoken. Cassian's tone sharpened. You are here to carry records, not interpret state action. Magnus felt her pulse in her throat. Fear did not leave. She chose words anyway. State action requires valid grounds. If this order stands, it creates unlawful seizure under Charter Article 12. She had not realized anyone new had entered until the silence shifted. Every person in the room straightened at once. She turned and saw King Alistair in the doorway, snow still melting at the shoulders of his black coat, 2 Wolf Guard captains behind him, and no fanfare at all. Cassian moved first, recovering his practiced composure. Your Majesty, a clerical interruption. We were concluding emergency measures. Alistair did not answer him. He looked at Magnus, and the quality of his attention changed the room's gravity. She felt it physically, a pressure that made every lie in the chamber suddenly expensive. Show me the order, he said. She carried it to him with hands that refused to shake only because she forced them not to. He read, flipped to the attached rolls, read again, and held the parchment to the light. Who drafted this language? Cassian spoke quickly. My office compiled from field reports. Alistair handed the decree back to Magnus. Burn it. Cassian's face went still. Your Majesty, delay risks unrest. Alistair's gaze stayed on Magnus. You caught this. Magnus heard accusation in it because accusation was familiar. I followed the figures. Good. He turned to the clerk table. No seizures. Audit every levy order issued this quarter. He left as abruptly as he had entered. The door shut. Air returned to the room in uneven breaths. Cassian fixed Magnus with a calm that carried threat better than anger. You have ambition beyond station. She answered before caution could stop her. I have eyes. The words cost her sleep that night. She expected dismissal at dawn. Edda found her in the archive stacks instead and said, You are still employed. Keep breathing. What does he want? Edda's mouth twitched, the nearest she came to humor. No one asks that about the king and sleeps well. Days passed without summons, and the waiting became its own strain. Magnus told herself the king had forgotten her face the moment he left the levee chamber. That interpretation fit the world she trusted, where powerful men used information and ignored the people carrying it. On the 5th day, A palace guard in nightshade black appeared at her desk with a sealed note bearing the crown. She broke wax with cold fingers and read one line. Attend the West Map Room at second bell. Come alone. The West Map Room stood above the council wing, lined with border charts and treaty copies pinned under iron tacks. Alistair stood by the long table with no advisors in sight. Winter light cut across his profile, silver at the edge of his hair, and she understood why courtiers described him as severe, even while failing to describe what made him difficult to face. Severity was only the surface. Under it sat concentration so complete it felt like scrutiny. He did not ask her to sit. He did not sit himself. I need counsel on border pact language, he said. Read Clause 17. Magnus reached for the treaty copy laid open before him. Her fingers paused when she recognized the wording. Supply guarantees tied to military movement rights for the rival pack from the southern ridge. The clause looked balanced. Its enforcement addendum did not. This gives them inspection access to every grain route in scarcity months, she said. That was the concession for cavalry support. It becomes control of food under legal phrasing. He watched her. My war council approved it. The room held a new kind of danger now. If she spoke plainly, she contradicted every high officer surrounding him. If she softened, she gave him nothing worth asking for. She chose plain. Your council read for troop numbers. They did not read for household survival. A long pause followed. She interpreted pauses as displeasure. She prepared for dismissal. Alistair said, Draft alternative language by dawn. Keep support terms. Remove supply vulnerability. She stared before she could stop herself. My king, I am not council rank. You are now advising me. That single sentence should have felt like elevation. She felt cornered instead. If he used her draft and it failed, Cassian would call her reckless. If he did not use it, she would become rumor anyway, the archive girl who thought herself equal to lords. Alistair seemed to read none of that from her silence, or perhaps he read all of it and chose not to expose it. You caught an illegal levy no one else challenged. I asked for counsel because you choose accuracy over comfort. He dismissed her with a nod and returned to the map table as though this were a routine administrative exchange. Magnus left with her pulse loud in her ears. She worked through the night with 3 lamps and 4 prior treaties spread around her. Every clause had to hold under stress. Every verb had to close a loophole Cassian could exploit. At dawn, she delivered a revision that preserved cavalry terms while restricting inspection to declared conflict zones, validated by local stewards and central auditors. Alistair accepted the draft at second bell. By evening, the revised clause entered negotiation packets with no mention of who wrote it. Magnus told herself that confirmed the truth. He needed a tool. Tools stayed unnamed. The interpretation steadied her until the next council session when Cassian dismissed grain stability concerns as clerical anxieties, and Alistair interrupted him in front of 14 officers. Clerical anxieties prevented unlawful seizure this week. Address the risk. Cassian complied. The room noticed. That was the first crack in the king's mask she almost recognized. He rarely corrected Cassian publicly, and when he did, he never cited individuals. This time, he had. She still found a safer explanation. He protected process, not her. Kings did not form attachments to archive keepers with rejected rank rights and threadbare winter coats. She kept giving him counsel because the work mattered, and because each request solved a practical obstacle she had not been able to touch before. She had wanted for years to close loopholes in border supply law. Now she could place language directly where it would count. Action replaced silence. Silence had never fed a village. Pressure rose from the opposite direction as soon as rumors began. Servants whispered first, then junior officers, then households tied to Cassian's faction. The story shifted by the hour. Archive keeper charming the throne. Archive keeper feeding strategy to unknown allies. Archive keeper betting ambition into law. Magnus heard versions of herself she did not recognize and discovered they all did the same work. They removed content and attached motive. Etta closed the records office door one night and handed Magnus a list of names. These are households repeating the same phrasing about you. Coordinated. Cassian is guiding it. Magnus scanned the list and felt one name hit harder than the others. Seren Valewood. Her sister had left North Court years ago and bonded into the Southern Ridge Pack for survival after their parents died. Seren's letters had slowed, then stopped. Not out of cruelty, out of necessity. That was the story Magnus kept, because it hurt less. Seeing Seren's name inside Cassian's circle pulled at that old wound where family and abandonment shared a border. Why would she come back now? Magnus asked. Etta's expression stayed careful. Because Cassian needs a witness who can make your character look uncertain. Family testimony sells better than documents. 3 days later, Seren arrived as part of the rival pact entourage, fur-lined cloak, Southern insignia at her throat, eyes older than Magnus remembered. Their first private meeting took place in an unused pantry because neutral locations were scarce in a palace built for hierarchy. Seren spoke first. I did not come to hurt you. Your name is in his circles. I used his invitation to get inside. He thinks I am here to strengthen the pact. Magnus searched her sister's face for the version she trusted at 15, when Seren used to braid her hair before winter festivals and promise no one could shame them if they stood together. That girl was harder to find now, layered under survival habits. What are you really here for? Seren looked at the closed pantry door, then back. Cassian told Southern envoys the king has become compromised and can be pushed into giving inspection control if enough pressure hits through tribunal law. He intends to force a public break. Magnus absorbed the information and felt anger arrive one beat later. You could have warned me by letter. Seren's mouth hardened. Letters get opened. I chose the path that got me here alive. She drew one breath and added what cost her to say. If this goes to tribunal with my name attached, Southern Command cuts me loose as traitor. Magnus held her gaze. I will not protect you with a lie. If truth needs your name, I use your name. Seren nodded once, flinching anyway. Then we finally understand each other. That answer carried the same old divide between them, Magnus choosing moral clarity first, Seren choosing survival first. Neither path was imaginary. Both had costs. The obstacle in front of Magnus changed shape now. Rumor could be denied. A charter challenge required legal proof. She returned to the archives with one question sharpened enough to cut sleep apart. If Cassian intended tribunal law, what hidden paper trail made him certain? Etta gave her access to restricted decree vaults kept under iron lock, shelves organized by regnal year. Magnus pulled every royal decree from 1321 through 1328 that touched levy, border movement, or emergency requisition. The window mattered because Etta had traced policy drift to those years, after the 1319 coup, during Alistair's isolation period, when he delegated administrative flow while trusting only military command. She worked through nights thick with lamp smoke, comparing wax chemistry swabs and signet depth impressions against certified Crown standards stored in sulfur paper. The method was simple enough for court use and strict enough to survive challenge. Each authentic decree showed identical resin composition and pressure depth from the Wolf Crown signet. The suspect decrees carried slight variants, added pine pitch and wax and shallower signet penetration, as if stamped by a copied seal under lighter force. By the fourth night, mismatch counts reached 11. By the sixth, she found the pattern that made her cold. All 11 suspect decrees diverted either grain control or border inspection authority toward offices reporting to Cassian. This was no clerical drift. This was staged governance. She carried the files to Alistair at dawn in the West Map Room, where their first council had begun. He listened without interrupting while she laid out samples, dates, and comparative depth marks. "Who else has seen this?" he asked. "Etta." Seren knows Cassian is forcing a challenge, not this evidence. Alistair examined a forged seal under lens light, jaw tightening once, the only movement. "If this is presented, he will invoke tribunal immediately." "He will anyway." He set the lens down. He expected accusation. He did not expect proof. Magnus waited for command. He gave none. Silence lengthened until she said the fear she had avoided naming. "If you proceed, he takes his military bloc and the Southern riders with him. The border weakens." Alistair's gaze met hers, direct and difficult to misread this time. "You are asking if I will trade you for cavalry." She flinched because the sentence was too exact. "I am asking if the kingdom can survive your choice." His answer came low. "I survived 1319 by trusting no one." Cassian built his leverage inside that void. He touched the forged decree stack with 2 fingers. 9 years of caution created this. He had never referenced 1319 with her before. The critical revelation arrived not as confession, as admission of causality. His isolation had protected him from intimacy and opened a corridor for administrative betrayal. Magnus saw the shape of his wound and the discipline built around it, an intended mate conspiring with Cassian in 1319, a failed coup, executions, a king deciding attachment would no longer exist in his life. Armor as governance. The mate bond law in their world complicated that armor. Wolves could feel the bond and still reject its action. Alphas felt it hardest and could deny it longest if discipline held. Magnus had heard that law since childhood as warning and comfort both. In that room, she understood he had been denying something for months, perhaps longer, and the denial was no longer complete. He gave orders rapidly after that. Closed council session at dusk, tribunal notice drafted under charter limits. Guard rotations changed to prevent record tampering. Action accelerated whenever he moved. The rhythm of his rule, stillness, decision, impact. Cassian answered with speed of his own. By sunset, he issued public statements through allied households alleging Magnus had manipulated royal confidence for personal elevation. By midnight, he filed formal tribunal challenge as high officer, exactly as Seren predicted. By dawn, Southern envoys hinted that military support depended on preserving institutional confidence, meaning her removal from advisory contact. Magnus walked through corridors where conversations ended as she approached. The old wound from 1320 reopened in familiar ways, public attention as humiliation, every glance measuring whether she would be discarded again. She considered withdrawing herself. One letter could resign archive post and vanish to outer villages before tribunal opened. The temptation solved immediate danger and repeated the original injury. Leave first so rejection cannot reach you. The obstacle she had to resolve was inside, not political. Silence had protected her once. Silence now would protect Cassian. She stayed. The closed council session became the next crack in Alistair's mask, visible to everyone who understood his habits. Magnus attended only as evidence witness, seated near the records desk. Cassian opened with practiced restraint, praising the king's strength while questioning recent emotional distortions in advisory channels. 2 generals nodded along. One steward avoided her eyes. Serene stood among Southern observers, face unreadable. When Cassian requested Magnus be barred from proceedings pending integrity review, Alistair responded faster than protocol allowed. "Denied," Cassian pressed. "Your Majesty, appearance of influence endangers pact trust." Alistair leaned forward. "The pact endangers households if written badly." She corrected what your counsel missed. The room froze. He had moved from process defense to personal attribution again, sharper this time, less deniable. Magnus felt heat rise under her collar and hated that her body still treated recognition as threat. Cassian shifted strategy instantly. Then test her claims publicly. Tribunal tomorrow. He wanted spectacle because spectacle had once broken her. Alistair accepted because refusal would read as fear. After session, Magnus found herself in a side hall with Alistair while guards cleared traffic. Snow struck the windows in fine, hard pellets. Neither spoke for several beats. She said, "You could still keep the alliance by discrediting me before the hearing." His head turned slowly toward her. "Is that what you think I am preparing?" "I think kings survive by cutting loose liabilities." The words hung between them like something fragile and dangerous both. For the first time, he looked not controlled, not distant, simply tired in a way no one ever saw. "I asked for your counsel because it was right," he said. "I kept asking because I could not pretend not to need it." That was the second vulnerability crack, and he seemed to regret it immediately. His posture reset, voice flattening back into command. "Get rest. Bring full decree comparisons at first bell." He walked away before she could answer. She did not rest. She spent the night preparing evidence boards with Etta, cataloging each forged decree by date, office route, wax composition, and signet depth differential. Serene arrived after midnight with one more piece, a coded correspondence copy linking Cassian to the 1319 conspiracy's surviving finance channel. Seren had stolen it from a Southern envoy satchel, knowing discovery could end her bond status in her adopted pack. Seren set the letter down between them. "Use it with full chain of custody. Do not hide where it came from." Magnus looked at her sister over scattered papers and saw the cost written clearly now. Seren had not chosen comfort. She had chosen risk after years of choosing survival. "Why now?" Magnus asked softly. Seren's eyes shone and held. "Because leaving you in 1320 kept me alive and taught me a kind of cowardice I am done carrying." The sentence landed deeper than apology. Magnus nodded once. They worked until dawn, shoulder to shoulder. No ceremonial reconciliation, only labor done together because truth required hands. Tribunal convened at midday in the same hall where Magnus had been rejected. The spatial symmetry felt deliberate, perhaps by Cassian, perhaps by fate, perhaps by architects who never imagined one woman would bleed in the same room twice and still stand. Charter law limited tribunal invocation to high officers. Cassian held that status as war advisor. 3 judges took their seats beneath the old wolf banner. Nobles packed the galleries. Southern envoys occupied the east tier, waiting to see whether alliance terms would survive. Cassian opened with confidence honed over decades. He framed the case as institutional contamination, a lonely king influenced by an unranked woman, policy irregularities resulting from her unauthorized access. Every phrase carried plausible deniability and social poison. Magnus listened without interrupting because interruption would feed his script. When called, she stepped forward with Etta beside the record stand and presented the decree sequence from 1321 to 1328, each mismatch documented against authenticated standards. She explained wax chemistry in plain language the court could follow. Resin composition variants impossible under official seal protocols. She demonstrated signet depth differential using pressure molds taken from certified and suspect documents. She showed the routing trail that moved authority toward Cassian-linked offices in each case, including the coded finance correspondence delivered through Seren Valewood and submitted under her sworn attestation. Cassian laughed once, controlled. "A basement clerk playing alchemist." Etta answered before Magnus could, voice crisp. "Chief Steward attestation confirms chain of custody on all samples. Any claim of fabrication accuses my office directly." Cassian pivoted to motive. "Even if errors occurred, they occurred under a king distracted by personal entanglement." The tribunal murmured. He had reached the heart of his tactic, force Alistair to deny attachment publicly to preserve political legitimacy. Magnus felt the room's expectation turn toward the throne. She understood the apparent impossibility in full now. If Alistair chose alliance stability, he could denounce impropriety, remove her, preserve cavalry support, and still prosecute Cassian quietly later. If he chose her openly, he would lose military backing at the border and expose the one vulnerability he had guarded since 1319. She did not look at him. Looking would ask. Asking would burden. Cassian bowed toward the dais. For the good of North Court, separate the throne from this woman. Alistair rose exactly as he had in the cold open, and for a brief moment the narration of his perspective belonged to the room itself, the way everyone saw him and failed to see him. He felt the old scar from 1319 in his ribs, where Coup Steel had entered. He remembered blood on palace stairs and the face of the intended mate who had fed guard routes to Cassian's men. He had built 9 years of rule on controlled distance and believed distance kept kingdoms alive. Standing in that hall, hearing Magnus reduced to leverage, he understood distance had only hidden rot until it rooted in law. He stepped down from the throne. "This court will hear me clearly," he said. Lord Cassian Voss altered royal decrees from 1321 through 1328 to redirect state authority. Evidence stands. Cassian's composure finally cracked. "You throw away your army for her." Alistair answered, "I throw away no army. I reject one purchased by fraud." The Southern envoy leader rose in protest. "Then our riders withdraw." Alistair did not look at him. "Withdraw." Gasps climbed the galleries. He had made the costly choice, not rhetorical, material. Military backing would drop before spring until he rebuilt command lines. He turned to tribunal judges. "By charter authority of the North Court throne, I remove Cassian from office, strip title and lands, and sentence exile under armed escort by nightfall." Guards moved before the echo died, surrounding Cassian. He twisted toward Magnus with hate stripped of polish. "You will break him as the last one did." Magnus held his gaze. "No. You did that." Cassian was taken out through the side gate where disgraced officers exited in silence. The sound of his boots faded under rising hall noise. Alistair lifted one hand. The hall quieted with visible effort. "Second decree," he said. "I establish 2 joint council seats to bind military and civil governance under shared oversight. Seat 1 is held by Chief Steward Etta Thorne, effective immediately. Seat 2 is held by Magnus Valewood, Royal Councillor." The room hesitated between outrage and recalculation. He had not merely defended her. He had rewritten the governance structure that enabled Cassian's fraud. Then he completed the reversal of her oldest wound. In this hall in 1320, she was publicly denied rank by corrupted judgment. Before this same court, I invoke throne law superseding pack custom and claim Magnus Valewood as my mate. The mate bond that had lived unnamed between them tightened into undeniable presence, heat under skin, breath catching, awareness narrowing until she could track his heartbeat by instinct. Alphas could reject bond action while feeling it. That had always been true. He was no longer rejecting. Every witness in the hall understood the legal and biological weight together. Alpha recognition and King's public claim, irreversible in social order. Magnus's disbelief did not vanish in a clean cinematic instant. It loosened, then fought, then loosened again. Her whole body remembered abandonment and public shame. Acceptance required action from her too, not passive reception. She stepped forward to stand beside him, voice steady enough to carry. "I accept the council crown. I accept the mate bond. I choose this with full knowledge of cost." That sentence mattered because it closed the final gap in her arc. She chose him in the same place where she had once been unchosen. She chose a role that would make her target daily. She chose visibility. After tribunal, consequences arrived fast and practical. Southern riders pulled out of the Northern Pass within 48 hours as threatened. Alistair reassigned local companies, accelerated winter militia drills, and reopened dormant defense pacts with two smaller border clans who preferred fair grain contracts over coercive inspection rights. Military strain remained real through thaw season. No one pretended otherwise. Edda's new council seat stabilized administrative flow by requiring dual sign-off on emergency decrees. Magnus's seat handled treaty and supply law review, exactly where past forgeries had nested. Every decree now required wax chemistry spot checks and signet depth verification logged by independent scribes. Fraud became harder, not impossible, but expensive enough to deter casual attempts. Seren stayed through winter under provisional guest status, while Southern politics settled around her exposed testimony and break from Cassian's network. Magnus had named her an open record instead of choosing family silence, and that choice cut before it healed. Their relationship withstood awkwardness better than speeches. Some days they argued in low voices over tea about risk and duty. Some days they sorted archive boxes in companionable quiet. Repair happened through repeated choices, not one emotional scene. One evening, Seren paused over an old family ledger and said, almost lightly, "You still keep everything." Magnus answered, "Someone has to remember accurately." Seren's smile was crooked. "You always did." It was a small line, tension breaking in the middle of heavy weeks, and Magnus laughed for the first time since tribunal. Alistair's transformation moved at the pace of a man trained to reveal nothing. Publicly, he remained concise, often severe, still speaking in declarative lines that turned debate into decision. Privately, he began adapting around her, asking instead of ordering when they worked through treaty drafts late into night. "What am I not seeing?" he would say over maps, or, "Walk me through the household effect." The shift sounded minor. In his language, it was structural. The intimacy between them developed through governance first, then touch, then trust. He would find her in the archive at impossible hours and place food near her elbow without comment. She would challenge his assumptions on border tax policy and watch his jaw tighten before he revised the order. Neither mistook this for easy romance. It was earned proximity, built in rooms where outcomes mattered. One storm-heavy night near winter's end, he asked her to walk the upper battlements where wind made speech difficult and privacy easier. Snow moved sideways across the torches. Guard posts sat far enough apart to leave them alone between intervals. He stopped near the North Tower and spoke without looking at her. In 1319, the woman I intended to mate helped Cassian plan entry routes. I executed 7 men that week and never let anyone close enough to damage judgment again. Magnus listened, hands numb in gloves, heart steady. This was the wound revealed fully, no strategic framing left around it. "I thought restraint was duty," he said. "It became fear disguised as discipline." She answered with the same honesty that had started everything in the levy chamber. "Discipline kept you alive. Fear kept you alone. They are not the same thing." He looked at her then, and the mask did not disappear. It softened where it met her. "You made separation impossible. You asked for counsel first." A breath that was almost a laugh left him in white cloud. "I did." Spring arrived with thawed roads and harder diplomacy. Cassian's exile completed under guard to the eastern marches, documented and witnessed to prevent martyr rumors. His lands were redistributed to households that had supplied seized villages during the levy scare, a practical correction Magnus argued for and won. The villages he targeted in 1328 sent delegates to court with grain ledgers balanced and no theater, only relief. At the first spring full court, Alistair presented revised charter amendments codifying the joint council structure, emergency decree verification standards, and civilian supply protections during military negotiation periods. Opposition remained, mostly from old-line houses that preferred opaque process. The amendments passed by margin after Etta and Magnus presented winter outcome data showing lower scarcity risk and stable troop provisioning under new controls. Policy did not sparkle, it fed people. Magnus liked that better than sparkle. Their mating ceremony took place at dusk in the Cedar Hall, not hidden, not theatrical. Witnesses included council, village delegates, guard captains, and the same elders who had stood silent in 1320. Alistair wore crown black. Magnus wore deep green trimmed with silver thread Seren had sewn into the cuffs herself. Etta stood behind them as charter witness. When vows were spoken, Alistair kept his simple. I choose you in public and in private, in council and in winter. Magnus answered, I choose you with clear eyes, not because you are king, because you listen when truth costs. The bond settled fully after that, no longer a pressure denied. A steady line between them she felt even across palace wings. Safety changed meaning. It did not mean absence of danger. It meant someone with authority and intention had decided she would not stand alone in it. Months later, on a morning with new leaves bright against stone, Magnus crossed the tribunal hall on her way to joint council and stopped at the central mosaic where her rank right had failed in 1320. The old memory rose and did not dominate. The space had been rewritten by action, not erased by wish. Etta joined her with a stack of decrees. You are late. I was thinking. Do it while walking. We have 2 flood petitions and 1 border complaint. Magnus took half the stack and smiled. You are relentless. Efficient, Etta corrected, already moving. In council, Alistair listened while she argued against punitive tariffs on a minor clan that had missed delivery quotas after bridge collapse. Cassian's old block would have fined them into dependency. Magnus proposed reconstruction credit tied to labor exchange and staggered repayment. Military quartermasters resisted, claiming precedent risk. Alistair asked 3 questions, turned to the quartermasters and said, Implement Councillor Valewood's plan. No ceremony, no dramatic music, just policy in motion. Yet this was the concrete proof her wound was answered. Her judgment carried authority in the highest room, and no one could publicly strip it away by calling her packless. That evening, she found Seren in the archive doorway, preparing to depart for the southern ridge under newly negotiated terms. Their goodbye held fewer sharp edges this time. Seren adjusted her travel cloak. If you had told me 5 years ago that you would reform North Court Charter from a basement desk, I would have laughed. You still might. I still might, Seren said, smiling. Come visit when road's clear. Magnus touched her sister's wrist, brief and firm. Right first. I will. Seren left with mounted escort at dawn, not exiled, not hidden, carrying formal papers as North Court liaison for cross-pack supply coordination. Divided loyalty had become aligned duty through difficult choices both sisters made. Night settled over the palace with spring rain tapping the high windows. Magnus sat in the west map room where this had begun, reviewing revised border clauses while Alistair finished guard reports across the table. Lamps cast gold circles on parchment. The quiet between them felt inhabited, not empty. He set his pen down. You are still waiting for withdrawal. She met his gaze. Some days. I know. He rose, came around the table, and rested his hands on the chair back behind her, close enough for the bond to hum warm under her skin. I ruled alone for 9 years because alone felt safer than betrayal. You asked me to choose better law before you asked anything for yourself. I noticed. She swallowed against sudden tightness in her throat. I did not ask anything, because I did not believe I could keep it. His voice stayed low. Keep this. He kissed her temple first, gentle, then her mouth, unhurried, no audience to witness, and no decree to make it real. It was already real. By summer, people in Market Rose referred to the 2-seat reform, the way they once referenced inevitable shortages as a fact of governance. Children in the river villages no longer watched carts with fear each winter because grain seizures now required transparent triggers and independent checks. Palace staff still gossiped, because palaces always did, yet the tone shifted from scandal to adaptation. The archive keeper had become counselor. The king consulted before decreeing. North Court remained hard and hierarchical, only less blind in key places. Magnus did not romanticize the work ahead. Factions waited for openings. Border weather still dictated scarcity risks. Trust required maintenance. She had learned enough to respect non-trivial trade-offs between security and mercy, speed and deliberation. Shared rule did not simplify complexity. It distributed responsibility so complexity could be met honestly. On the longest day of summer, she and Alistair stood on the south terrace overlooking training fields where new militia companies drilled under revised command lines. He pointed to a unit led jointly by village captains and palace officers, one of Edda's integration experiments. Ugly formation, he said. Effective formation, Magnus corrected. He glanced at her, and the corner of his mouth moved. That rare, almost smile that once would have felt impossible to earn. You are insufferable in policy debates. You asked for counsel. I keep asking. The answer lived there, simple and daily. He kept asking. She kept answering. Their bond was not escape from the world that had hurt them. It was the framework inside which they changed that world together, one decree, one risk, one chosen act at a time.